So hi, I'm Melissa Logan. I'm the director of the Data on Kubernetes community. I'm excited to dig into this data with everybody today. I wanted to share some background on why we do this report in the first place and a preview of some of what you'll see. So we've been doing this report for 2 years now. We started it in 2021. At that time, and still today, there wasn't in-depth research on data on Kubernetes usage, adoption, trends, challenges, opportunities. So we wanted to dig into that and understand, are people actually using data on Kubernetes? How are they using it? And what are the issues that they have? And why do they use it? So the first year we did this report, we partnered with ClearPath. Stephanie from ClearPath is here today. We partnered with them for the past 2 years on this. And the first year, what we learned is it was pretty unequivocal that people wanted to run data workloads on Kubernetes. About 90% of people said that they believe Kubernetes is ready for stateful data. And the reason they were doing it was productivity primarily. So I think we saw some folks that were seeing 2 times or more productivity in a majority of the respondents. But of course, there were some challenges with it that we found out that first year. There was a lack of interoperability with their existing stack. The Kubernetes operators that they use to manage day 2 operations, lifecycle management of the workloads. There were challenges with quality of the operators. And so the second year, 2022, we wanted to dig into that. So what are the challenges that they have with operators? What do they think some solutions are to that, as well as to understand the other business benefits, what is driving them to do all of this, even though it is challenging. And we also want to understand the types of workloads that people were prioritizing and why. So that's what Stephanie is here to dig in with everybody today. Very excited to share this with you. Stephanie, please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa and Bart, for hosting me. I'm really excited to be here and to share the findings that we had from the second year of this report. It was actually pretty cool because we saw a lot of growth. So I'll go ahead and just jump in. Just to start us off, we interviewed via survey over 500 executives and tech leaders on just how data on Kubernetes has a transformative impact on their org. And that we saw that was regardless of tech size or tech maturity. We really wanted to measure the impact of running Kubernetes data on Kubernetes workloads, show the benefits, and then show sort of that journey or that roadmap for others to follow as they progress in their own journey. And again, our approach was to survey a little over 500 practitioners, team leaders, and org leaders. They were selected really based on their experience, org size, industry, IT infrastructure that they use, Kubernetes use, and developer type. So I'll go ahead and just talk a little bit about our key findings. So first, we definitely see a defined link between running data on Kubernetes workloads and big gains, and especially in the areas of revenue and productivity measures. The type of workloads being run could have an impact on these gains, but the relationship is there regardless. The benefits aren't limited to orgs that we defined as leaders. And although these leaders tend to see the majority of the gains, the impacts are really felt across the board. And this should naturally lead to more and more complex data workloads shifting to Kubernetes. Third, there are still challenges. Organizations that are working hard to get the most out of their data on Kubernetes workloads, they still run into structural challenges. And even as they move to some managed services, they tend to rely on a patchwork of solutions, including operators, but there's a great value in overcoming these obstacles. Lastly, the future is really looking good. So we see an uptick in expected hiring and reskilling for data on Kubernetes workloads. Organizational leaders recognize the inherent value in consistency and ease of management especially. So we should expect more data workloads to shift to Kubernetes going forward. So I'll talk a little bit about who we talk to. Before I do that, I kind of want to go over some of the stringent measures we use to make sure that we're talking to the right people. Pretty much in all of the work that we do, we want to make sure there's no bots, there aren't any bad actors, or just people that don't fit the type of respondent that we're trying to attract. So we implement a variety of measures, including making sure that they're not going through the survey too fast, making sure that they're answering our open-ended questions, and they're answering the question and they're not just writing, gibberish or nonsense answers. We make sure that they're not just clicking, 55555 across the board. That's called straight lining. So we implement a wide variety of measures to make sure that these are the right people we're talking to, and these are the people that we want to hear from. So I'll jump into our demographics. So we see majority of people in the IT industry. That's a pretty normal finding for us. Org size is somewhere in the mid to small enterprise level. Revenue is pretty standard across the board, looking at somewhere between 100 million to 10 billion as the majority of our respondents. Roles are generally kind of the upper level manager, VP, CIO, CTO. We did put a cap on leadership, so we made sure to get a wide range of practitioners as well. We see the majority of our respondents from US and Canada, and then most have started running their data Kubernetes workloads about 1 to 2 years ago. So next, we really set out to define the technical maturity of a company. The data-driven enterprise scale is one that we designed and validated at ClearPath, and it's a validated tool that allows us to measure tech maturity of organizations. And this is primarily based on their use of and ability to operationalize and derive value from data. So as you can see, most of these questions are to do with use of or ability to make gains from data. Based on this scale, our respondents were categorized into 4 main categories. So there are the leading users that represent 13% of respondents, advancing, which is 37%, aspiring, 29%, and lagging are 22%. So really, we are skewing toward the advancing and leading end of the spectrum in our group, which is not surprising based on our data, based on the respondent type that we were looking for. So we want to kind of jump into what we saw as a transformative impacts of data on Kubernetes workloads. One of the biggest highlights of our findings is that the majority of respondents, so about 83% here, attribute at least 10% of their revenue to running data workloads on Kubernetes. These data actually show that the benefits of running data on Kubernetes workloads go beyond engineering, and they benefit the organization at large. Then we have just under 10% who actually say that they attribute more than 20% of their revenue to data on Kubernetes. So this is a really big finding. We're seeing a transformative impact on revenue by running data on Kubernetes workloads. And for the leaders and advancing folks, gains are even higher. While we see that leaders are seeing the most gains, the highest gains here, the benefits from running the data on Kubernetes workloads, they cross the board regardless of tech maturity. Most leading and advancing organizations attribute 11% or more of their revenue gains to running data on Kubernetes, while 43% of aspiring and 48% of lagging organizations attribute 6% or more. This finding we really saw, it might explain why we're seeing organizations planning to move more of their workloads, more of their data workloads to Kubernetes. We'll talk about that a little later in the report. Productivity gains were big too. We are looking at a third of these folks attributing huge productivity gains to running data on Kubernetes workloads. And again, these big measurable impacts aren't limited to leading orgs. So it's true across organizations at any maturity level. Most leading and advancing organizations see their productivity increase by 2% or more, while even the aspiring and the lagging experience 50% or more productivity gains. So organizations actually see data on Kubernetes having a transformative impact on other key business metrics. And that's including revenue, that's including market share and margin. As expected, leading organizations are seeing the greatest impact of these gains. But the more technically mature organizations are, the more transformative impact they can expect from running data on Kubernetes. And so you can see from these little callouts on the side, you see the leaders gaining the most of these transformative impacts. So let's talk a little bit about that journey to running your data workloads on Kubernetes. Running your data workloads on Kubernetes, the benefits of this are completely clear to us so far. But how do you actually get there? What are the steps that you take? This data shows that most organizations begin their data on Kubernetes journey by starting with their databases and analytics workloads, and then continuing to move down the line to more complex workloads such as AI/ML, streaming, and messaging. Interestingly, we saw analytics jump to the number 2 spot this year. It was actually number 6 last year. So we're seeing a lot of kind of change and growth in those complex workloads being move up to the top. And AI/ML went to number 3 from number 7, and persistent storage actually dropped from number 2 to number 4. So as organizations are getting more comfortable running their data workloads on Kubernetes, you're seeing them kind of move those complex data workloads to Kubernetes, where they can start to standardize. What we're really seeing here actually reflects findings from other studies that we've done, especially recently. And this just showing the growing importance overall of AI/ML, business analytics, and real-time data to orgs across the tech org maturity scale. So this is actually reflective of the growing importance of those complex data workloads. And the fact that these AI/ML data workloads are increasingly being run on Kubernetes is really reflected in the tools that practitioners decide to use to fulfill these needs. So you see Kubeflow, TensorFlow, PyTorch, MLrun, and these are all ML tools. So that's this slide is really, we see these AI/ML workloads really being reflected here in the types of tools that they use. And ultimately, running data workloads on Kubernetes brings just a vast number of benefits to organizations, including this ease of scalability, ability to standardize the way workloads are managed, consistency from dev throughout production environments, ease of maintenance. I mean, just manifold benefits are reflected here. And organizations really want to standardize the way they run their workloads, and Kubernetes is becoming the tool of choice for that. While laggards appreciate standardization, leaders are experiencing even greater improvements in ease of maintenance. So they're finding it easier to just maintain their data workloads using Kubernetes. So what's the kind of underlying story here? Where do we bridge the gaps that we're seeing between the manifold benefits of running data workloads on Kubernetes and the challenges we're facing? So why run? First of all, let's ask the questions. Why run data on Kubernetes workloads? I would say organizations, based on our findings, organizations run data on Kubernetes to streamline their IT operations, by really ensuring consistency here. And this is especially true for the leaders. And then next would be to simplify management. This impact really isn't limited to engineering. So 35% of respondents chose to run data on Kubernetes to increase revenue growth. And they really did that successfully, as we saw previously. But we see that the promise of running these data workloads on Kubernetes and these benefits, while apparent, are still somewhat unmet. So achieving these goals aren't without their challenges. And so while the data on Kubernetes toolset and ecosystem continues to grow, we have more work to do. So last year and this year both, we saw organizations cite a lack of integration with our existing tool set as the number one challenge of running data workloads on Kubernetes. Second is a lack of qualified talent. They're really having a struggle to find people who know how to run data workloads on Kubernetes. This might correlate with the third challenge, which is too much time and effort to manage. So we're finding people who don't know how to run these data workloads on Kubernetes. And much of that might be because it takes too much time and too much effort. And this is really a pretty common thing that we hear from Kubernetes users, and not just those running data on Kubernetes. The more usage and benefits, the more talent required to do these workloads. So organizations are going to start hiring more people who know how to run these data workloads on Kubernetes so they can move forward in their business. Just kind of wanted to point out that this last metric here, little or no vendor solution success, was actually number 2 last year. So this might be an indicator that as use of Kubernetes is increasing, vendors are actually equipping their customers with the right tools that they need to run their data on Kubernetes workloads. And getting data workloads running on Kubernetes is the first hurdle. So that's the day one. You get your data workloads get going on Kubernetes. On day 2, they start to struggle with structural challenges, and especially as they look to automate provisioning and configuration management. Then to handle these day 2 operations, organizations really rely heavily on Kubernetes operators. About 81% are currently using or evaluating operators to run their data on Kubernetes workloads. The operator pattern uses the Kubernetes API to create, configure, and manage instances of complex stateful applications on behalf of a Kubernetes user. So they're really kind of a cornerstone of data on Kubernetes workloads, and at least most organizations use at least 20. Organizations really, like when you look at operators and what the expectations are for them, they really expect operators to perform at a very high level. So we used the operator framework as a grading scale here, and fully over a third of organizations expect operators to properly handle all day 2 operations. That includes applications, storage lifecycle, backup, recovery, failure, and then 40% expect advanced capabilities such as the ability to provide metric alerts, log processing, and workload analysis. And then we see here that leaders unsurprisingly require the highest level of automation from their operators. And then when organizations are evaluating, they're looking to operators to adopt. Security is really that number one criterion. The possible explanation for that is data being the most critical asset for organizations. And Kubernetes is really not that easy to secure. But we also see that security prioritization isn't a new finding. This is something that we actually see across the board in most of our studies. Org leaders regularly cite security concerns as a top focus and something that they plan to work on in the next coming years. Kind of want to circle back and just talk about how highly satisfied users are standardizing on data on Kubernetes. Starting off, organizations are very satisfied with running their data workloads on Kubernetes. We have this satisfaction equals reality minus expectations. And really what we see is data on Kubernetes is winning that expectations battle. The chart here mostly mirrors overall data on Kubernetes usage, with satisfaction at its highest for the most widely adopted workloads. So that's going to be databases, analytics, and then emerging use cases such as CI/CD and streaming and messaging. They still have a bit of room to grow. I didn't note here, but really almost 50% of leaders running streaming and messaging workloads also show a higher percentage of satisfaction on data in Kubernetes. And these high rates of satisfaction really lead to higher usage. Over half have 50% or more of their data workloads running on Kubernetes, with even more expecting to increase that by 30% in the next 12 months. We see here, leaders are really all in. Almost half plan to increase their data and Kubernetes footprint by 50% or more in the next 12 months. But the future is bright. Large volume of data on Kubernetes workloads and high satisfaction is really compelling organizations to upskill or hire talent with data on Kubernetes expertise to meet this growth. So we saw that the lack of talent and lack of training was one of the challenges, and this is where they're trying to meet that. So they're going to hire and reskill their developers to handle these workloads. And really, everyone's sold. The benefits of standardizing data workloads on Kubernetes are clear, and organizations don't doubt that doing data on Kubernetes is the right path forward. But they really require the right tools, integrations, and workforce to do so. So finally, I just want to kind of review what we talked about. Kubernetes is ultimately becoming the industry standard for managing their cloud-native data applications. We saw that running data on Kubernetes workloads results in big gains in revenue, productivity, market share, and margin. But there are still some challenges remaining. So heavy reliance on operators to bridge those day 2 structural challenges, especially related to security, are still kind of blocking the path to a smooth transition to Kubernetes workloads. And then a lack of qualified talent that could lead to a bottleneck unless the reskilling and rehiring goals are achieved. So those are both of the biggest challenges that we see organizations facing in this journey. But path forward is clear. Org leaders really recognize the transformative value that gains from data on Kubernetes and Kubernetes standardization that really make it worth overcoming these challenges. So, and that's it. Thank you guys so much. It's been a real pleasure talking to you and sharing these findings, and I hope that this was useful.
Yeah, I have just a couple questions for you too before we end. One of the questions is that you at ClearPath are independent researchers and you track a lot of trends in this space. So I'm curious, how does this match or not with other data that you've seen related to Kubernetes or data workloads?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually do see in a lot of our research, we ask about the tools people are using, about containerization, about kind of what they're looking toward doing in the next 2 years. And Kubernetes pretty much always comes at the top of the list, either in use or in planned use. And then, like I said, much of our research has been focused on the trends and sort of future thinking and, kind of thought leadership goals of leading organizations in particular. And what we do see is that in addition to high use of Kubernetes across the board in organizations, from leaders to laggards, we also see a great number of organizations kind of upticking their requirements for use of real-time data, use of streaming and analytics. And, those workloads are going to become more and more important. So I kind of see that correlation happening where as more companies see the benefits of running their data workloads on Kubernetes and, coinciding benefits of those higher and more complex workloads, those two things are going to start to merge together, I feel like, in kind of like a upside down funnel. So, so we actually do. We see those two things coinciding, and it's actually very cool to watch happen.
Yeah, I think we see the same. We talk to a lot of different folks in our community and the end users in our community. And there are people who have started their, let's say, analytics workloads. That's one area we're looking at right now because it jumped so from 6 to number 2 in our survey this year. We've been talking to people about what they're doing with analytic workloads and the challenges they're still facing with that. And it still is very much we can do some of it, but not all of it very seamlessly conversation. So that's interesting to hear that you're seeing that reflected elsewhere too. In fact, we're forming a panel to talk about analytics workloads in particular to understand, kind of dig deeper into what are the key challenges and opportunities that people have there.
Oh, awesome. I love that. And I think that we're going to start to hear sort of an echo chamber of people starting to say, how important they are, the challenges that they're facing, but how important they are to their bottom line at the end of the day. So I'm excited for that. That's going to be a really cool research.
Yeah. And we'll be producing a 2023 research report again this year too, and digging into more of these types of questions as well. So you'll be hearing more about this from the Data and Kubernetes community in 2023. I just want to make a plug for anyone who hasn't downloaded the research report yet to please do. If you go to DoK.community, there is a tab in the top navigation to download both the 2021 and 2022 reports. A lot of great data in there, as Stephanie covered. And if you're not part of our Slack community, please join us. We also just announced a new special interest group around operators to tackle some of the challenges that you heard Stephanie illuminate today. What can we do as an industry to help resolve some of these on behalf of end users? That's what we're discussing in the operator SIG. It was just launched in November of 2022. We're just getting going. Would love to have people who are interested in participating in that discussion. Please join us. And if you have questions about that, just find me or Bart on DoK Slack. And if you're an end user that are experiencing operator challenges and have something to say about it, which I hope you do, please reach out to us and tell us. We want to hear from you. But that's it. I appreciate the time today, Stephanie. Really excited to do the 2023 report with you folks again and try to understand a little bit more than we do today and help move the industry forward. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.